Welcome to another LinkedIn Live discussion brought to you by Optiv, the cyber advisory and solutions leader. I'm Alan Mayer. I serve as Senior Vice President, Partners, Alliances, and Solutions. First, I want to encourage all of our viewers to participate. Do you agree with what we're seeing? Please join the conversation by adding your comments, your questions, and predictions in the chat. We'll do our best to get to them in real time or at the end. We're just over a month away from closing the chapter on another exciting and turbulent year in the cybersecurity industry. Realistically, though, the challenges that we collectively faced aren't going anywhere. From ransomware, we see social engineering and supply chain attacks, complex regulatory environments. We see tool consolidation and this move to platforms, solutions, and outcomes, and of course, compressed budgets. And these issues won't disappear in 2024, and probably not even in the near decade. We all, and I do mean all, will continue to face an expanding threat landscape. It doesn't matter if it's in your everyday lives as individual consumers or in our workplaces across every vertical: technology, government, retail, industrial, and so on. The best that we can do is be prepared for what may come. So with me here today to discuss top of mind cybersecurity trends and predictions for the next year and beyond are Randy Larrier. Randy leads Optiv's big data, analytics, AI, ML solutions and services team, and Woodrow Brown. Woodrow is Optiv's Vice President of Research and Development. So let's start with AI. We know the arms race and tools and offerings will continue. Randy, what stands out to you as the next breakout application for AI when it comes to both offensive and defensive cybersecurity?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me on today. I think that 2023, we've come to call it with our clients as the year AI went mainstream. So although these technologies and capabilities have been with us for 2 decades now, solidly embedded into life, the advent of ChatGPT and the tremendous amount of money pouring into development, research, and productization of these large language models and related capabilities have really spiked the interest in the application for AI in all kinds of ways. When we kind of look across the year, this has been a year where over 70% of businesses have run some form of AI pilot. Probably somewhere close to 90–95% of all companies have people who are using these generative AI, whether sanctioned or unsanctioned. And I think a lot of the investment and planning and development that was piloted this year is going to continue to begin to bear fruits next year. We're seeing across our partner landscape, a lot of the technology and product companies that we work with, although they may already use AI, they're incorporating generative AI. They're thinking about additional use cases. They're finding need to bring in new staff, new capabilities to deliver an automation experience and an insight generation experience that is going to really push the boundaries on what we even thought was possible with technology. So all of that to say, I think we're kind of in the early innings of a major AI transformation of society, and we've only really started to scratch the surface in terms of what these language models can do and what AI models can do as integrated parts of a technology stack. And so I think that we will be seeing additional investment in additional R&D. And from a cyber perspective, it's going to be an ever-increasing percentage of your footprint. Where you think about technology, it's going to be AI-embedded technology with all the benefits and the risks that come with it. Some of the risks being AI, like any automation technology, helps you to do bad things faster. Whether they're intentional bad things from bad guys or unintentional misconfigurations or potential spread of things that you don't want to have spread. All of the best practices that were true before 2023 are going to become even more true in 2024, except that the time to detect is going to need to be faster. The time to remediate will need to use AI to work to detect and shut down potential risk vectors as they're occurring. And so it'll just be more and faster. And there's going to be a continued focus on the space from different forms of trustworthiness, of reliability, of safety, and cyber attack vectors that are all going to continue to be part of the conversation as we go forward.
Thank you, and definitely some interesting points. I mean, you also bring up just the need of scale and automation. And so, like Woodrow, thinking more generally, automation's nothing new, right? So, what do you see as the most attainable for security in the near term for implementing automation and or AI?
Sure, and thank you for having me on the call as well today. And I'd like to kind of highlight a couple of the areas that Randy spoke to with respect to moving fast and remediation, because I think that's an area where we consistently help clients get to remediation faster. So the drive to remediation has always been kind of a core tenet of IT, a core tenet of cyber. I think back to kind of like the sysadmin ethos of, if I have to write a script, if I have to do it twice, I'm gonna write a script to do this. It's just that we have better tools at our fingertips now than bash scripts. So one of the latest things to come out as I was watching the GitHub's keynote speech was the rapid improvement in how they're using Copilot within the platform. So it's not terribly new, but they keep adding features and components to get to that remediation state even faster. So this is a big deal because it's allowing us to continue to shift left and reduce cost and boost efficiency and fix code defects before they reach runtime. So now we have a security-aware pair programmer that can help you fix these code defects faster, remediate faster. So, what's really happening here is we have a whole class of tooling that's helping security operators get to a remediated state faster, provide better guidance around what to do next, and actually have actionable steps. So we're seeing these being built out across several different platforms, whether it is a coding environment or something like a CNAPP environment or vulnerability management tool. We're all getting improved, state-of-the-art kind of remediation steps, kind of hand scripted and handed to us with these AI kind of Copilot tools today. So I think that's something we can act on immediately right now.
And just to add too, I mean, the developers and the sysadmin, they have the early adopters. They're getting a lot of the benefit. But one of the magical things about this wave of generative AI is it's reached the point where code is generated in language, in English or whatever your native language is. You can convert that to code. So we'll see a lot more developers get more out of Copilot to be able to do more faster, ideally to do more securely faster. It will also increase the risk front of non-technical people who are able to write technical code, to do technical things very fast, which is tremendous opportunity for the efficiency and productivity of businesses, but of course needs frameworks, needs guardrails, needs to be concerned. And ultimately, again, I think early stages, but over the next few years, we will see more and more information work move into the domain of how articulately can you describe the problem you're trying to solve, and how can you work with an AI copilot of various different natures to get the right kind of outcomes, to focus on less about perfecting the tool and more about perfecting the outcome. With this comes the risk of over-automation or over-reliance, where you have AI perhaps do things that it shouldn't do, or do things so well that you think it works well, and maybe that is true 95% of the time, but once or twice it will do something catastrophic. And so there's a whole new category of risk and concern when it comes to over-reliance on AI, and why it's critical in cybersecurity and other fields to continue to develop skills and competencies around the fundamentals and the basics, to understand how the technology works, to how the remediations are intended to impact the security state, and to use AI as an augment to humans, not as a replacement, in many ways where that would actually increase the risk.
I appreciate that call out. And it's interesting because we talked about automation. Now, as you call out, maybe an over reliance on automation or AI. And that's an interesting call out, especially, we see most organizations are in the midst of this large digital transformation. And these are pretty pervasive initiatives. Woodrow, what do you see as the next big shift then, or something that should be a priority in 2024? When it comes to executing on those digitization goals?
Sure. For organizations that are really moving quickly, a major theme that comes to mind is internal developer platforms, which go hand in hand in operating with a declarative environment. So breaking those down, right? We have the outcomes that are looked to be achieved by operating from an internal developer platform, developer self-service, lower cognitive loads, which all drive faster, more consistent development. So the key things here really are consistency and repeatable patterns within a defined model. They're all enablers for security. Programming has taken place in a Git-based environment for some time now. We've moved infrastructure into these Git-based environments. So this model is well known. The key thing here is that we are writing these, writing it down. So you're writing down the servers, networks, databases that you're defining. This expands the opportunity to use policy as code, which we can codify our organizational policies, where we can build in compliance requirements into code. And again, because this is all explicitly written down, it can be read by both humans and machines, hence AI. So we have this kind of approaching shift where we're gaining the ability to use APIs across all of our security tooling, understand its state, detect drift, and eventually apply configuration changes at large. So thinking further out, we're going to be able to use natural language to build out these declarative stanzas. And these forces will streamline how security technologies are implemented, allowing security teams higher levels of visibility and fidelity within the environment. And with their digital assets and data flows, all kind of supporting this faster move to digitalization, and hopefully a more secure move as we're explicitly defining the operating environment and applying security over top of that.
And just to add, I think everybody on this call is familiar with technology debt, and most businesses have old systems, some very old systems in which it's a persistent cost just to find qualified resources to maintain or fix them. Talking about mainframes, things that were developed in the 80s and the 70s, sometimes are still essential to a lot of the businesses and services that we rely on. The generative AI wave, there are estimates out there, within a matter of years, all of that can be cut over. That knowledge and expertise, the logic in those systems can all be moved into newer, basis and at a cost point that is so much more competitive than where it even was before with different kind of outsourcing models. So tremendous opportunity for CIOs, CTOs to think about their technology stack and making the investments to get off of that ancient hardware and onto more cloud modern solutions. On the flip side, a lot of risk in there to be making these massive migrations and making all these changes in a insecure way. You're going to be introducing new vulnerabilities into your world, and so the transformation wave is going to continue, and I think accelerate with these tools, as will the risk surface expand.
Yeah, and I think a couple of good points, right? One thing we definitely see is, and I have a prediction here around data, is, and it's an easy one, right? Because it's true every year. In 2024, we'll have a record amount of data created, but more isn't always better. We have really valuable discussions with many of our partners around data, and it's not just the data, right? It's the data to insight. That insight then leads to actions. Those actions drive outcome. And so just the fact that there's more data, that doesn't always make it better. Randy, what are your thoughts on that?
It often makes it worse. Everybody likes to talk about big data and having, AI trained on massive data, and that certainly has its place. But we're the ones standing up for small data, little data, right? Trying to find the right kind of insight is sometimes a very simple process of finding, the right 2 or 3 numbers that have to come out of, a haystack of information. So when we look at tooling like SIEM and SOAR and UEBA, different tools that help our clients get detections and analysis into their environments, they're of course looking at machine logs and system artifacts that can be many terabytes per day flowing through these systems, and they're really looking for that needle in a haystack of a signal that something's not quite right, or there may be something worth investigating. That gets harder and harder the more volume there is, as the data volume increases faster, we hope, than the signal volume, and that drives costs in storing and computing and working with that data. So you have to make careful decisions. One of the common things we see is a lot of people try to save everything because they believe they have to, but there are different flavors of saving everything. There's certainly a way to rationalize what you store and where and how you process it. I think more and more companies are coming to this realization, and a lot of investment is going into the technology space to try to solve that problem or make it easier for customers to make decisions about which data goes where and take ownership over how their data flows. I think it's also important to think about when you need the data. You'll pay the most if you need to see all your data and millisecond response times. And let's be real, even if you're alerting on the millisecond of every anomaly that comes through your SIM, do you really have someone standing there ready to triage it? Or have you set up your AI automations enough to work with it? The reality is some things can fire every 5 minutes or can fire every day or can be on a monthly report. And thinking about the timeline of those different data events is an important consideration into architecture, which maybe we could get away with not thinking about before, but as data gets bigger and the costs go up, there needs to be a commensurate rationalization of the SOC technology that you're putting the right data in the right place at the right time.
I think a couple of things you mentioned are really pertinent. One is it's the importance of clear, actionable data in ingestion, and we talk about that with our partners quite a bit. And our customers, our clients are demanding that. It's also being able to compile and execute on that data so there's more informed decisions that drive better business outcomes. And we talked initially around this move to technology rationalization. We see those efforts will increase. We see this drive to platform consolidation and the demand around accelerated outcomes and solutions. And then we also talked about compressed budgets, right? And being able to save money and leverage efficiencies in security teams are increasingly leveraging technology rationalization to actually realize some of those gains, and being able to drive capabilities for tools and services that some of these organizations currently have. And that data doesn't necessarily just sit in a vacuum, and it's not only for the good guys to use, right? And so it's also what bad actors have access to as well. So maybe if we just shift over to the threat landscape, there were some major mainstream attacks this year. And so what do you see for the most prominent attack methods that we forecast in 2024? Woodrow, I'll ask you first.
Sure. And unfortunately, attacks are consistently up and to the right. Last week, we saw a major bank succumb to a ransomware event, disrupted the bond market. So talk about front page news there. Over the weekend, I was, as we're talking about AI here, I was looking at OpenAI's new Assistant API. And so I was on their playground kind of checking things out. Of course, the banner across the website read, we're experiencing delays due to denial of service attack. So, if you discount some of the recency bias with what happened last week or last month, reports covering incidents and breaches are really showing denial of service is moving up. It's not necessarily a breach and the data isn't lost or ransomed, but it's still a prominent attack vector that our clients and many organizations have to deal with. Beyond that, we see complex attacks leading to systems access. And then here we do have ransom events and threat actors deploying other tools in the environment. And these breaches are more and more being targeted through web applications and API endpoints. So overall, unfortunately, right, we're seeing these breaches and attacks using social engineering and web application attacks increasing in nature. Speaking a little bit to the social engineering attack standpoint, right, where we have business email compromises increasing, kind of using pretexting to great effect. It's really increasing the need for effective employee training and security awareness training as these social engineering methods are just getting more and more savvy over time. It's, you really have to pick out the needle in the haystack and understand when a threat kind of has entered your environment and how to respond to those threats appropriately. Now, even looking onto ransomware, right? So if you haven't kind of been watching these models closely and following what's happening, it's an entire business ecosystem. You have highly motivated cyber criminals offering ransomware essentially as a service. Unlike many of our legitimate customers and organizations, these organizations have minimal tech debt, right? They're using modern software methods to build out ransomware as a service networks, where you have different types of specialists involved in these organizations, initial access brokers that are getting folks in, people that are working on platform and tooling, even support. You can put in support tickets, as well as additional folks to help run ransomware campaigns. So putting it all together, you really have this whole kind of ransomware attack supply chain that is, they're highly motivated by financial gain, and we're going to continue to battle them in 2024 and going forward.
Yeah, I'll add a couple points too from the social engineering side. Generative AI has worked wonders for audio and video. Impersonation of people is now table stakes that any sophisticated or unsophisticated attacker can use, as well as writing clear English or native language sounding emails and text messages. It's really no longer enough to find the bad grammar or the kind of logical inconsistencies. While OpenAI and Google get a lot of the attention for the AI work that they're doing and kind of putting out on the world, they have to recognize there's a whole ecosystem of open source, dark web development happening to make tools that are just as powerful to help with social engineering and help to deploy the various tools of hacking faster. A co-pilot for doing bad. We've seen some examples of these that have come to light, and I'm confident there are many, many more that are being used in a lot of different ways against us. So again, that just reduces the time to infiltrate a system and plant your ransomware. So the time that you as defenders have to respond is condensing, as well as it's going to require greater automation to try to intercept and slow down these things. The overall point being that we can't necessarily protect against them. And I think this pivots into our next conversation too, which is that you do have to assume that you will be breached and you will be compromised, and have to architect your plans accordingly.
Yeah, and I think as you touch on some of those items, I want to ask you guys a follow-on question on that. But first, any specific thoughts around just the continued focus on supply chain security?
Sure, maybe I'll take that first and then have Randy follow up. But yeah, we didn't mention that in the original kind of list of kind of threats and everything you have to watch out for. But of course, it is top of mind. So not only do you have to deal with DOS attacks, social engineering, ransomware, supply chain security, and attacks are on the rise. So this includes using both third-party code securely, as well as securing your own development process from beginning to end. To some degree, the promise of the open source kind of revolution has been realized, whereas now we have around 10% original code in applications, and then 90%, is being pulled from an open source community. So this, this community that the code base is being pulled from is largely unknown and therefore untrusted. So you're putting an implicit trust in place when you're using these software packages. So, again, the issue is twofold, right? You have the possibility of succumbing to some type of third-party breach because you're using their software in your environment. And then you have the possibility of having your own software supply chain compromised. We have high-profile attacks this year from Microsoft, HCP, of course, SolarWinds, CodeCo further back. The list goes on, and it's kind of raised the public awareness around securing the software supply chain. Unfortunately, there are multiple links and interdependencies. You have the most popular kind of package registries out there being targeted: JavaScript, NPM, Python, PyPy, and others, because the modern application has well over 100 dependencies on these open source packages. So we've got the government and the Biden administration kind of weighing in, building out executive orders on software supply chain. It's created a kind of a tailwind in the industry. We've got a proliferation of companies for SCA and other aspects of secure coding. And then we've got a lot of organizations that are trying to comply with these mandates and increase the security around their software supply chain internally.
I think you raise a couple of good points, right? Which is that with AI everywhere, the data supply chain, right, must also be secured. And it's not just from the exfiltration, but also from the injection of that malicious data to train models potentially for undesired outcomes. You also mentioned zero trust. And so it feels sometimes like that can fall victim to marketing, but zero trust as a concept has been around for a while. So Woodrow, I'll ask you, of what do you see for those initiatives as it becomes an established strategy?
Sure. I mean, just thinking back to the various kind of updates in technology that we've talked about with how to utilize AI for remediation, the threat landscape that's increasing, the ever-increasing amount of data that you have to deal with, and how you're building out data pipelines and utilizing that data in your SecOps programs. And then we've got to, of course, kind of like wrap all of this in a zero trust context, which starts to get complicated, but hopefully isn't, because zero trust, while some might claim it's a buzzword, it's certainly been a core tenet of cybersecurity from the very beginning, right? Default postures is trust nothing. And if you start there, you can make a lot of progress. So at Optiv, we really see zero trust as having an identity-aware, context-based security model. So that means you're revalidating interactions instead of relying on a known good state. You're doing this at a frequent occurrence, possibly as frequent as every interaction. Every request is revalidated based upon the context. Of course, moving down the road to getting to the closer and closer of revalidating what an individual requester is asking, understanding the context of that request, and then making an accept or allow or deny kind of statement from what the resource is trying to access. And this is all kind of wrapped into building microperimeters around applications and services that are encapsulating these resources. Similar to the way that we think about how to apply automation, which is frequently and is at the point, at the closest point as possible to apply that automation. It's kind of the way we want to think about, applying these microperimeters, is frequently encapsulate these resources in control layers that need that active validation before you accept or deny a request. Now, thinking about AI and shifting left within the digitalization process and defending against threats, to wrap this in a zero trust framework and then use threat modeling to determine what is most at risk and start layering those zero trust controls on by prioritizing the outputs of those threat models. So there are lots of good resources out there. Due to the a good example of another executive order coming out of the Biden administration for zero trust, right? So we have CISA and NIST have put out great guidance around zero trust maturity models, as well as architectures. Of course, Optiv has our own teams ready to jump in and assist you in your zero trust journey at any level or stage.
Yeah, definitely. And I know thank you, Woodrow, and there's a lot we've covered, and I'm sure there's quite a bit that we haven't. But one area I brought up initially, and I wanted to make sure that we touched on, was regulatory landscape. And it's complex. Many organizations are struggling to stay on top of all they may be required to do. Randy, I'll turn it over to you to capture your thoughts there on regulatory landscape.
Sure thing. And especially in the AI world, just 2 weeks ago, we've got the Biden administration executive order on AI, and really a sweeping set of mandates for executive agencies to start doing their own, ruling and structures around AI. There's a lot in there that we'll have to watch in the next 180, 360 days as the various agencies begin creating some of the frameworks and the direction that they'll have. So the big thing from the U.S. at least is the priority that AI is to the government to have a say over what it does and how it's evolving and what is and is not considered fair is considerable, but it's not yet, and I don't think it'll ever be clear cut. There are a lot of stakeholders. There are a lot of folks who will try to put different mandates on what you can and can't do with AI, and different kinds of regulations from the industry you're in, from obviously if you're in the U.S., if you're in certain states have legislation, even certain municipalities like New York City have laws on the book that impact AI and data use. Data privacy is another big one that we've seen over the past couple of years, has been a big thing, and is continuing to see new laws come into power in the U.S. and elsewhere, mandating what you do with your data. Similarly with AI, we've seen in the European Union a real landmark piece of legislation around AI that is expected to go into effect, to pass this year and go into effect in full force in a few years. And we can see that AI law from Europe end up being a template, or things that customers need to think about in the U.S. So the long story short is that there's a lot of uncertainty here. And if you even take away the regulatory side and just think about the legal system, different lawsuits over the intellectual property of language models, such to the point that all the major AI vendors have created legal shield funds that will in theory test their clients if they fall subject to a lawsuit. But of course, these are things with many law, it's not really proven until it's worked its way through the court systems, and there's been an opportunity for that process to happen, and that is measured in years, if not decades. And so in the interim, I think what we advise our clients, and you also look to leading agencies like NIST in the U.S., is think about best practices, think about governance, for the sake of governance, building models that are right sized for the use case and the risk profile they have, thinking about controls and security and identity and access management as you're building with AI and other kinds of automation. And ultimately, you can align to a lot of the things that the law is going to want you to do as a business. You could de-risk yourself by including that as part of your project plan, and thinking it kind of through from the front, that you can build an AI model that can do a lot of things, but if that model is a black box and nobody really understands how it works, you may down the line need to refactor that and consider a whole lot of other tooling to keep that thing compliant. So there's a lot of trade-off, and unfortunately, I don't see that getting any simpler. In fact, you look at the trend of new laws proposed across municipalities worldwide; it's only going up and to the right. And so, modern organizations that are dealing with data and AI and cyber-related regulation, I think they're just going to need to continue to mature in how they do their own governance and try their best to align that to the governance that's provided by the regulatory bodies.
Thank you, Randy. And I also want to thank our listeners. There's been great participation and questions that are flowing in. One of the ones I wanted to ask you, Randy, is there's a great question in the chat of how do we spot providers who have robust AI platforms versus vendors who are maybe using it as a buzzword?
That's a great question, and thank you, Sean, for asking that. Sean is another director here at Optiv who does great work with a lot of our partners and different technology teams. AI is easy to say, and has at the risk of oversaying it, it's always amazing how much appetite there is in the current market to talk about it. I think as you're evaluating the AI capabilities of a partner or a vendor, it's important to ask questions about what the AI actually does, what capabilities that it brings that you may not have otherwise. There's also data privacy and treatment of data concerns that you should have. Is this truly an AI functionality that this partner has built, or is it a back-end API that's going over to OpenAI or to Google Bard? And so in fact, there's two parties. That's totally fine. I think it's just important to be transparent about what that is and how it's working. And also ask questions if you're procuring it or if you're considering doing work with them about what happens to the prompts and the grounding data that you might put into that model. Who owns that data? How is it used for further training or for other kind of support? So there's a lot of questions that technology companies need to answer in terms of the treatment of your data within AI. It is true, though. AI has been around for long enough that it is part of almost every major technology. And I think that one of the nice things about it being so democratized, it really does come back to value. So you use AI, great. So does everybody else. But what value do you provide? How do you connect? Solve the problems that I'm trying to solve, and are you thinking about the ways that those problems are going to evolve? So you're not just a point solution, but you're actually providing an ecosystem that is AI and expertise and capabilities to go solve particular problems.
And maybe I'll just add to that, right? There's since December last year forward, right? There's just been this explosion of interest in generative AI, large language models, but there are other types of AI and machine learning models that can be applicable to different scenarios. So it's not just that like LLMs are going to solve some type of generalized cybersecurity problem. You want to ask the vendor which models they're implementing, what use cases those models are set up for. Because it's not always just some type of text completion, right? They're reinforcement models and different ways to utilize data throughout ML and AI to get to different outcomes. It just so happens that generative AI is very buzzy because it's easy to use. It's on your phone. You've got an app for it right now.
Yeah, great feedback. I think another good question was, do we see a reduction of new recruits for cybersecurity being repositioned from frontline monitoring and leveraging AI for automation of that type of monitoring? If so, what rules do you see these new recruits pivoting to?
I'll start and see if Randy has anything to add. But when we're thinking about recruiting cybersecurity talent, the skill sets that we're recruiting for, I think, have shifted over time, right? And now as we look at things like detection engineering, bringing in various programming skills, as everything has become kind of a software stack. We were talking about policy as code, declarative infrastructure, right? This skill set has moved from core networking whizzes down to people that understand Python. So there are certainly different skill sets that we need to look at in today's cyber landscape that have drastically kind of changed from a decade ago or 2 decades ago, the hiring skill sets that we would have focused on.
Yeah, I love this question too, because it's true of any industry and technology over time. I think that fundamentally problem solving and thinking about what the right question is and how to the value of an engineering degree is maybe not necessarily the technology that you learn in the engineering degree, but thinking about how to take something apart and see the pieces fit together. And that's something that you can have engineers who graduated 30 years ago and all the technology that they trained on is not applicable, but they still maintain that mindset. And some of the engineering leaders that are most respected have that kind of first principles approach to things. And so I think that's always going to be valuable. I think AI gives you a lot of tools to accelerate if that is your goal, to find that information, to work with that information. To Woodrow's point, Python is like the native language of many of the AI models. You can get very good Python code, and you can have it explain that Python code in ways that can make you a very competent Python programmer starting from zero. But I do think that again, there will be new problems. There are new kinds of issues that using AI have, where you talk about the frontline monitoring. Sure. There will be automation that helps to triage and handle some of the lower level things, but somebody needs to look after that automation. Someone needs to bring data sources in and configure them and make sure that as data tends to drift and change, that is incorporated into the AI models that potentially powering the SOC of the future. And so I think it's a great time still to be getting into the market and to be thinking about cybersecurity and solving these problems. I like to joke everybody got an intern who, very smart, very well-meaning, but still needs very clear direction on what to do. The same is true with the cutting, GPT-4 models as it is from, automations of days past. It's about critical thinking and solving problems that add value for your business.
Yeah, there's been, thank you. And there's so many great questions coming in. I probably have time for one more. One of the questions that we're seeing is this increase of or uptick in cybersecurity firms getting into the market. And it appears many of them are capitalizing with the explosion of AI tools. So I'll take that first and then turn over to Randy and Woodrow if there's any thoughts. I think we see this, high fragmentation of tools and products and organizations that help solve problems. And ultimately, our clients want to be able to drive business outcomes. We also see this move from product to platform, especially in the largest organizations. And we're proud of the transformation we're driving from product to solution. And it's in that intersection of solution and product that we can really drive accelerated outcomes for our clients and accelerated growth for our partners. I think as you get into AI, and I'll turn it over to Randy and Woodrow, if there's any thoughts there, of you see that as a catalyst, I think is really the question for really driving that uptick and the new emergence of competitors in that space. We have seen continued growth from solutions and capabilities. And I don't see that slowing down, but there's also components around consolidation. We've seen some of those recently and some of them pretty substantial. We at Optiv are at the intersection of hundreds of cybersecurity solutions and capabilities and highly valued partners that are really focused on driving accelerated outcomes to our clients. Specific to the AI tools, and if that's driving explosion, I'll turn it to either Randy or Woodrow.
So I think that AI has decreased the barrier to entry for a lot of startup formation or branching into new domains. It certainly helps, as we talked a lot about with code. It can also do a lot for marketing and for customer services, and the lack of technical debt means it's very easy to spin up a company that can do some component of cyber things, and so that likely is addressing some of the trend, and I think it's true in a lot of different sectors as well. I think that there's also just a large downward pressure on costs, and it's something that we're acutely aware of. There's something that a lot of our clients are looking at is if AI is working and it's secure and it's driving efficiency at some point, it costs less to operate a business than the existing business model. And again, that's why I say we're still in the first inning, because I don't think I've seen massive disruption and change driven by AI specifically. But I do believe that we will see that to start to happen, and we'll see some in 2024. We'll see some epic failures as well as some epic successes of AI-driven models, as it's not the panacea that everyone hopes it will solve all the problems, but it can certainly do some things quite well. So I think that that's going to continue to drive the conversation. I know that a lot of the executives and boards that we speak to are acutely aware of the business benefits of automating both their front office and their cost functions. And there's still a lot to be proven to see it at scale. But we will, in the cybersecurity arena, of course, be partnering with many of the folks who are using AI more, looking to incorporate it in how we do our operations internally as well, and really just be better every day at securing greatness, whether through AI and all the other means we have at our disposal.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Randy. Thank you, Woodrow. Really appreciate you sharing your expert insights on cyber trends and the predictions to watch. I thank all of you for joining Optiv for our LinkedIn Live. And if you're interested in learning more, please connect with us at optiv.com to view our resources. Thank you.